Hey everybody, Mike from Cyberfueled IT here. Got a very quick video to cover Monster Hunter Wilds and can it run on older hardware? Stick around to find out. We're going to explore whether Monster Hunter Wilds can run on older hardware or if it can't. I've had a few customers reach out wondering if their older computer systems can actually play the game or if they have to invest in either a new video card or new processors. So I decided to do a video to take a look at it and see, is it something that can actually be run on older hardware or will they actually have to upgrade? What I found might surprise you, and it's a little bit interesting to see that a latest game can actually run on some of this older hardware, but how well does it actually run? So we'll dive into that. But first, I want to look at the system requirements for Monster Hunter Wilds and the minimum and the recommended as to what Capcom is pretty much recommending your PC has spec'd out. So just to give you guys a little bit of a breakdown, the test rigs that I'm going to be running, I have a very old machine that's an 8700K with a 1080 GPU in there. And then I have a newer rig that's running a 3080 and a AMD 5950 that's in there as well. So I ran benchmarks on both of them with a variety of settings, and I've got a series of clips. But before we get into those clips and break down kind of what we saw between each of those clips and whether this game is going to be worth it on older hardware or if you will have to invest in some hardware, whether it's a GPU or a CPU, let's take a look at those system requirements. Okay, so the system requirements for Monster Hunter Wilds is pretty straightforward. For the minimum system requirements, you need a 64-bit processor and an operating system. So that's pretty relevant with Windows 10 and Windows 11. The Intel Core i5-10400. Or an Intel Core i3-12100, so either a 10th gen or a 12th gen. An AMD Ryzen 5 3600, 16 gigs of memory, and a graphics card, whether it's a GTX 1660 or better with 6 gigs of VRAM, or an AMD Radeon RX 5500 XT with 8 gigs of VRAM. DirectX version 12, standard with Windows 10 and 11 and 12. And you've got 75 gigs of available space on an SSD drive. It is going to be required for an SSD drive these days. Unfortunately, spinner drives are going to be out. So one thing to note here is for the minimum requirements is this game is expected to run at 1080p, upscaled from a 720 native resolution at 30 frames under the lowest graphics settings, which is what we've tested here on the clips that I'll have coming up shortly. From a recommended perspective, same requirements for both the processor, the memory, the OS, none of that changes, but the graphics do change. It wants to utilize DLSS, so when you look at the RTX 2060 as the recommended settings, or an AMD Radeon RX 6600, again, that's using FSR, that's what they want to use for the upscaler to really push this. And again, everything else is the same outside of the note that they have here, saying that this game is expected to run at 1080p with 60 frames with frame gen enabled. And under medium graphics, not even talking about high graphics here. So that's what we have for the system requirements. When we take a look at what is actually the system requirements for the minimum, the 8700K is an 8th gen processor, so it's not even listed as this, minimum requirements as needed. And the GTX 1080 is actually a better performing card with more VRAM than a 1660. But I think the 1660 just came out in 2019, so that's what they've listed here, but there's not too much, I think, different between those two cards. I'm pretty sure the 1080p, the 1080 card is actually a better performer in most titles, so we shouldn't have too many issues with the minimum requirements here. But if you do not meet these minimum requirements, you might have a bad experience, but let's go ahead and roll those clips and see what we got.
As soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great!
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon. Welcome! Please
Go
eat.
ahead, help yourselves.
Yeah, okay?
As soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great.
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon. Welcome! Please
Go
eat.
ahead, help yourselves.
As soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great.
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon.
Look!
Welcome! Please
Go
eat.
ahead, help yourselves.
soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great.
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon.
Welcome. Please
Go ahead. Help yourselves.
Yeah, okay.
As soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great.
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon.
Welcome. Please.
Go ahead. Help yourselves.
Yeah, okay.
As soon as we find a good spot, we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can get started.
This is gonna be great.
You bet.
Yeah.
I hope we find them soon.
Welcome. Please
Go ahead. Help yourselves.
All right, so there you guys have it. There is 6 clips right there, 3 from the 8700K and 3 from a newer rig with the 3080 and the 5950 in there. You can definitely see the 8700K does seem to work, runs the benchmark without any problems. So from a CPU perspective, even though it's not listed as a minimum CPU, the benchmarking tool still launches. I'm not so sure about the actual beta test. Haven't had a chance to test the actual beta client on that rig, but the benchmark ran. Probably a pretty good indication that it will launch and run. From a graphics perspective, though, on the 1080 and on the 8700 on that older machine, there's definitely some artifacting and problems. Runs very, very low frames. It has a lot of artifacting across, and it gets really smeary as you start turning on upscaling and, you know, any type of frame generation. You get a lot of that shadowing and just tons of, you know, artifacts across the board. I mean, there's nothing really else to say about it. Will it run? Yes. Will it be an enjoyable experience? Probably not. So if it's a game that you're looking forward to, their minimum specs are probably dead on from a quality perspective. If you're looking to get that upscale, they are looking for that, you know, at least a RTX 20 series or higher. FSR looks a little weird. When FSR was running on the 3080, the FPS was definitely higher. But funny enough, the score was actually lower, right? So the score was closer to 16,000, almost 17,000. And with DLSS on, and of course I don't have frame gen for DLSS. I don't have DLSS 4 with frame gen. That's a 50 series and 40 series thing. For a card, I don't have one of those. But I had a 20,000 score. So almost 20, 21, 22,000 from a score perspective. Well, depending on what that score means, I have no idea. It's a benchmarking tool. But the frames were higher with frame gen, which makes sense because it's generating frames. On the 3080, you'd have a pretty good experience overall. I've played the beta, you know, over the past couple of days. It runs fine on the 3080. There's no issue whatsoever, which is makes sense because it's above the recommended system requirements. And I was also playing at high settings versus medium settings. So no issues there. But for that lower end tier card, for that 1080p, if you're trying to get that and play the game, it's probably not going to be the greatest experience. You know, doesn't mean you can't play it. If you want to run it on the lowest settings, it will run. No issues whatsoever there. So yeah, that's kind of what we found out. What are your guys' thoughts? Do you think if you've got an older rig, would you give this a shot? Leave a comment down below. Curious what people are thinking. Whether you want to shovel out thousands of dollars to upgrade the machine, or do you just pass on this title and maybe grab it on a console? So leave your thoughts down below in a comment. Curious what people are thinking about it. So that's going to do it for this video. Appreciate you guys tuning in, watching the video. Hopefully it gave you a little bit of insights that maybe some older hardware doesn't have to be upgraded, but in some cases, such as video cards, you may have to get with the more modern times if you're definitely sitting on a older video card. But, you know, do all the things, like, subscribe, share the video out. Comment down below again if you have any other additional, you know, questions or comments or things we can do differently in the video. Leave a comment down below, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.